Iran says it will completely close the Strait of Hormuz if President Trump follows through on his threat to obliterate the country's energy infrastructure unless Tehran fully opens the waterway by tomorrow night. The strait carries about a fifth of the world's oil and gas supplies, and fuel prices have soared since Iran began restricting shipping through it. Meanwhile, the UK government has questioned Israel's claim that Iranian missiles could strike as far as European capitals, including London. And it's emerged in the last hour that the Prime Minister and President Trump have spoken on the phone and discussed the need to reopen the strait. We'll have more on that in a moment. First, here's our World Affairs correspondent, Joe Inwood.
Iran's ballistic missiles have been at the heart of this conflict. They were one of the stated reasons for the US and Israel starting this war. Alongside drones, they are also a potent symbol of Iranian resistance. One that state media is keen to show that they are still firing, sending their enemies a message. And they don't always need to hit their target to have an impact. The revelation that 2 ballistic missiles had targeted the US-UK base on Diego Garcia, 2,500 miles south of Iran in the Indian Ocean, has led some to rethink the threat they could pose. Iran has the largest and most diverse arsenal of missiles in the Middle East. Now, they are mostly short and medium range, designed to target other parts of the region, but they also have longer range ballistic missiles. Now, before the war started, the furthest they were believed to reach was just over 1,200 miles. That's about 2,000 kilometres. But after the attempt on Diego Garcia, Israel claimed that they can travel twice that far, potentially threatening parts of Europe. But this morning, the risk to London and the rest of the UK was all but dismissed by the British government.
I'm not aware of any assessment at all that they are even trying to target Europe, let alone that they could if they tried.
But there is another thing. At those ranges, these missiles, which Iran will not have that many of, are said to become incredibly inaccurate and have to reduce their warhead to make themselves lighter. They would also have to get through European missile defences.
The Iranians would be firing a small number of missiles against a missile defense architecture that's optimized against them with a small payload and limited accuracy, all of which would suggest they have limited incentives to do so, unless, of course, they assess that the political impact of doing so was valuable, irrespective of the real-world impact.
But the thing that's already having an impact is the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, that crucial waterway. Last night, President Trump took to social media and said if Iran doesn't fully open without threat the strait within 48 hours, he would obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. Responding, Iran's president insisted the Strait of Hormuz was open, while the Speaker of Parliament threatened irreversible destruction to energy infrastructure and oil facilities.
Trump faces two choices. He either doubles down, escalates, and launches an operation to topple the regime. And you're not going to do that without an extraordinary, massive land force marching on Tehran, which I think is inconceivable. The other alternative is Trump says, I've declared victory, I'm going to walk away from this. But that's not going to fool anyone. Trump will be humiliated in doing so.
For all the talk of ending this war, every day it feels like it escalates further. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to personally pursue senior commanders of Iran's Revolutionary Guards during a visit to one of the 2 towns in southern Israel that was struck by Iranian missiles yesterday. The attacks happened on Dimona and Arad, from where our correspondent Lucy Williamson reports.
Last night, this Iranian missile crashed into the town of Dimona. Whoa! Within miles of Israel's nuclear site. And another within meters of apartment blocks in nearby Arad. A rare breach of Israel's multi-layered air defenses that could have transformed Israel's experience of this war. More than 160 people were injured in these strikes. 3 weeks into this war, trust in Israel's missile defense system is high. Many families here said shelters were several minutes' walk away, and after repeated alarms yesterday, Some chose not to move. Very few missiles have been getting through Israel's air defences, and Israeli leaders claim to have taken out the vast majority of Iran's missile launchers. This strike is a reminder that Iran's regime still has the control and the capacity to continue this war. Israel's army says that control is weakening, despite Iran firing a long-range missile at a US-UK military base yesterday.
This is not just an Israeli problem, because they fired missiles towards countries who have nothing to do with this war. Especially, by the way, the UK has nothing to do with this war. They fired a missile towards a British asset without the British being involved. What tells you that they won't fire a missile all the way to London? Because we learned yesterday they can't.
Israel's Prime Minister says this war has already changed the Middle East. Today, he said the threat from Iran remained.
What more proof do you need that this regime that threatens the entire world has to be stopped? Israel and the United States are working together for the entire world. And it's time to see the leaders of the rest of the countries join up.
The threats and targets in this war are escalating. Tonight, Israel's army said it faced weeks more fighting against Iran and Hezbollah. This bridge over the Litani River bombed today, Israel said, to stop Hezbollah fighters moving south. 1 million Lebanese have now been displaced. Israel has ordered forces to raise homes in some areas here using Gaza as a model, a blueprint for destruction, used again as a path to peace. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Arad.
Well, here the Prime Minister is to hold an emergency meeting tomorrow with the Governor of the Bank of England, the Chancellor and the Energy Secretary to discuss what can be done to tackle the rising cost of living caused by the war with Iran. The boss of Centrica, which owns British Gas, has said an increase in household bills may be inescapable if the conflict in the Middle East continues. Here's our political correspondent Joe Pike.
Prices at the pumps are rising, with petrol up 12p a litre since the conflict began and the jump in diesel double that. But could energy prices soon follow when the next price cap expires in the summer? The boss of Centrica, which owns British Gas, argues it's possible.
If it stays as it is, then I think that's inescapable. Prices have moved by up to 25% on a single day. And so I think we've seen quite a lot of movements. I think we really do have to wait and see. I don't want to alarm people.
Ministers want the conflict finished, but without that, they're under increasing pressure to act.
We're monitoring this, believe me, hour by hour, and as intervention is required, the government is making appropriate interventions. But we're already focusing on keeping bills down. Bills will go down a week and a half by £120 on average.
That is because of the drop in the next energy price cap, which starts in April and runs until the end of June. Maximising the extraction of oil and gas from the North Sea is the policy of both Reform UK and the Conservatives. They also want to remove levies on energy bills.
What I'd like to see is British people taxed less. A huge chunk of their bills are because of taxes, particularly green levies. We're advocating a reducing of the amount of money that the government adds to those bills. Let's start off with that.
The Lib Dems argue the best way to insulate the UK from future shocks is by growing the economy and negotiating a customs union with the EU. Tomorrow, Keir Starmer will assemble his most senior economic officials to try and work out how best to protect families and businesses. The extent of the financial pain felt in homes across the country all depends on how long and how severe this conflict turns out to be. And ultimately, much of it is out of the Prime Minister's hands.
And Joe is here with me, along with our economics editor, Faisal Islam. And Faisal, let's talk first of all about that emergency meeting tomorrow. It's all about the cost of living. What are the options on the table, do you think?
Well, firstly, it is pretty unusual to have a meeting like this. And I don't think we should expect the specific policies or packages that people might think would be being prepared, as a result, direct result of this meeting. It's a gathering of cabinet ministers with the Bank of England governor tomorrow afternoon. But I think it is quite important in this sense, which is this war has been going on now for 3 weeks. It's clearly disrupted markets. It's already filtering through to inflation. The way to think about this is a wave of inflation is coming from that gulf where the ships aren't getting out. But now I think you have to sort of start to think of the contingencies if it does last for 3 months. So we would see that in the potential domestic energy prices, which are going down on April the 1st, but that would clearly change in July. They're trying to work out what the scope of any intervention could be, and right now we think that that would be targeted and not a general package that we saw in 2022. But you've got to think about the other economic supply chains, unexpected, not just oil and gas, things like helium for chips, things like urea for fertiliser and for farming. All of this becomes much more severe an issue the longer it goes on, and that's where it looks like it's going.
All right, Faisal. And Joe, the relationship between Keir Starmer and President Trump has been tricky during this conflict. Where is it now, do you think?
I don't think it's getting much better. No signs of that yet. Of course, we've seen a deterioration. We've seen Donald Trump call Keir Starmer, quote, no Winston Churchill. But today, the president, I think, moved a step further in reposting a video of a comedy sketch which really ridiculed Keir Starmer, painted him as weak and not even able to pick up the phone to Donald Trump. It was from the debut of the Saturday Night Live UK sketch show yesterday. The sort of comedy video you might share teasing a political rival, not teasing an international ally who just agreed to let you use a UK military bases to launch defensive strikes to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Let's take a look.
Why is it so blubber difficult to talk to? Sir, just be honest and tell them we can't send any more ships to the Strait of Hormuz. Oh, crumbs. I just hate conflict so much.
Tonight, Number 10 have told us that they will be not commenting on the reposting of that video, but they have said in the last 20 minutes or so there was a call this evening between Trump and Starmer. I'm told it was constructive, Jane. I'm told it lasted about 20 minutes. The key sentence from Number 10, the leaders discussed the current situation in the Middle East and in particular the need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to resume global shipping. The view of allies of Keir Starmer is that he hasn't been running scared. Ultimately, he said no to Donald Trump. They argue that at the key moment he made the right call in the national interest. But the fact that in public you have this element of ridicule does mean we are fascinated and intrigued, Jane, by what on earth is the tenor and tone of those conversations in private, including that 20-minute call tonight.